The story broke before the stadium gates even opened, and within an hour, it was the only thing anyone in the city wanted to talk about. Every VIP seat, every luxury suite, every premium box in the entire stadium, bought out in a single transaction by a single name. Massimo Callaway. Sports reporters scrambled for an explanation, throwing out theories about private corporate events, secret celebrity appearances, maybe even a political fundraiser disguised as a night at the game. Rival families in the city read the same headline and understood something the public never would. This wasn't excess. This was a message, because Massimo Callaway did not waste money making statements he didn't intend to finish. Somewhere inside that stadium, behind a wall of private security and tinted glass thick enough to swallow sound, he stood watching a live feed of every entrance, every hallway, every badge that scanned through the gates. He wasn't looking for celebrities. He wasn't looking for politicians. He was looking for one woman who had spent the last 8 months convincing the entire world she no longer existed. Her name was Sienna Calder, though the badge clipped to her blazer tonight said otherwise. To her coworkers, she was simply the new hire, sharp, polite, easy to forget. To Massimo, she was the only person alive who knew the truth about a missing file capable of ending 3 criminal empires in one news cycle, including his own. 8 months ago, she had walked out of his life carrying secrets he could never let resurface. Tonight, for the first time since then, she had walked into a building he owned every inch of. She had no idea the stadium's luxury tier had been cleared just to corner her. She had no idea every exit had already been accounted for. And she certainly had no idea the man she once trusted completely was now close enough to see her face on a screen, watching, waiting, deciding exactly when to make his move. As the lights dimmed and the crowd's roar climbed toward kickoff, Massimo finally allowed himself a small, cold smile. 8 months of searching came down to one night, one building, and one woman who was about to learn there was nowhere left in this stadium to disappear into. If this story has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't subscribed yet. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and tell us if you'd love more stories like this one. Now let's get back to the story. Sienna clipped her radio to her belt and ran through the seating chart one more time in her head before stepping out onto the concourse. Section by section, suite by suite, names she had memorized that afternoon, faces she hadn't seen yet, and a checklist long enough to keep her mind occupied for the next several hours. That suited her fine. A busy mind didn't have room left over for fear. Her supervisor, a tall woman named Priya with a headset permanently clipped to her ear, caught up with her near the escalators. "You're covering the East Suites tonight," Priya said. "All of them. Whoever bought this place out wanted minimal staff rotation, so you're the only face they'll see all night." Sienna nodded, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "One client for the entire floor. That's a lot of money to spend on privacy." "Tell me about it." Priya glanced down at her tablet, scrolling through something Sienna couldn't see. "Just keep the trays full, keep the names straight, and don't ask questions. That's the job tonight." "I never ask questions," Sienna said. "Questions get you fired." Priya almost smiled at that. Then her radio crackled and she was gone, swallowed by the crowd gathering near the gates. Sienna made her way down the east corridor, past rows of empty leather seats that smelled faintly of polish and money. She straightened a stack of menus on a side table, adjusted a chair that had been pushed slightly out of line, and checked the small gold plaques bolted to each headrest. Everything here had a place. Everything here had a purpose. She liked that about hospitality work. It gave the illusion that the world could be organized, even when her own life had been anything but for 8 long months. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that every step she took down that corridor had already been accounted for somewhere else in the building. 3 floors above her, in a glass-walled office that overlooked the entire stadium, a man named Dario Calhoun studied a tablet of his own. On it, a floor plan of the East Wing glowed in soft blue light, with a single red marker moving slowly along the corridor Sienna had just walked. "She's on schedule," Dario said, without looking up. "East Suites, same rotation as the staff roster we pulled this morning." Across the room, another man, older, calmer, with the kind of patience that came from decades of watching other men make mistakes, studied the same screen. And the exits? Massimo asked. Covered, Dario said. Service stairwell on level 2, freight elevator behind the kitchens, the main concourse doors. All 3 watched, all 3 logged. She walks toward any of them, we know before she's taken 3 steps. Massimo didn't answer right away. He simply watched the red marker pause near a supply closet, then continue forward again. She still doesn't know we mapped her schedule before she even clocked in tonight, he said finally. No reason she should, Dario said. Her transfer request to this stadium's hospitality group went through 6 weeks ago. The contractor doing the staffing didn't even know they were hearing someone we'd been looking for. We made sure of that. Massimo's jaw tightened, just slightly. 6 weeks of waiting after 8 months of searching had a way of testing a man's patience in ways violence never could. Tell the floor team to hold their positions, he said. Nobody approaches her, nobody spooks her. I want her exactly where she is until I decide otherwise. Dario hesitated, just for a second. And if she figures out something's wrong before then? Massimo's eyes stayed fixed on the screen, on the small red marker now moving toward the private suite entrance that would, eventually, lead her closer to the one place in this building she least expected to end up. Then she's smarter than I gave her credit for, Massimo said quietly, but she still won't make it past the door. Down on the east corridor, Sienna paused near the entrance to the largest suite on the floor. The one Priya had flagged as off-limits until further notice. A folded card sat on the reservation stand outside it, blank except for a single line of gold script across the front. She picked it up, turned it over once, and frowned. There was no name on it at all. Just a time. And the time was now. Sienna stared at the card for a long moment before she finally looked up, scanning the empty corridor as if someone might step out and explain the joke to her. Nobody did. The suite door in front of her stood slightly open, just enough to suggest she was expected, which made no sense at all, because nobody on the schedule had told her she'd be serving anyone before doors officially opened. She knocked once anyway, more out of habit than confidence. Come in, Sienna. The voice on the other side of that door hit her like a physical thing, like the floor had shifted slightly under her feet. She knew that voice. She had spent 8 months trying to forget exactly how it sounded, and apparently she had failed completely, because every part of her body recognized it before her mind even caught up. She pushed the door open slowly. Massimo stood near the glass wall of the suite, hands in his pockets, watching the field below as if she were the least important thing in the building tonight. He didn't turn around right away. He let the silence stretch, the way he always used to when he wanted someone to understand exactly how much control he had over a room. You changed your hair, he said finally, still facing the glass. You bought an entire stadium, Sienna said, her voice tighter than she wanted it to sound. I think we're past small talk. That made him turn. 8 months had not softened anything about him. If anything, he looked sharper now, colder, like a man who had spent every one of those months sharpening a single point. His eyes moved over her face the way they used to when he was deciding whether someone was lying to him, and Sienna felt that old, familiar urge to look away. She didn't. 8 months, Massimo said. Do you have any idea what those 8 months have cost me? I have a pretty good guess, considering you just spent what looks like a small fortune tracking down one event coordinator. You're not just an event coordinator, Sienna. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. You walked out of my house with a file that could end 3 families, mine included, and then you vanished so well that even people who are very good at finding people couldn't find you, for 8 months. I didn't take anything. The words came out fast, sharper than she meant them to. I have told you that every single way I know how to tell someone something, and you never once believed me. Funny, Massimo said, because the cameras believed something different. Then the cameras were wrong. Sienna stepped closer, anger finally burning through the fear that had been sitting in her chest since she picked up that card. Or somebody made sure they showed exactly what you wanted to see. Did you ever stop to consider that, Massimo? Or was it easier to just hate me? For the first time since she'd walked into that suite, Something flickered across his face that wasn't certainty. It was small, it was quick, but Sienna saw it because she had spent 2 years learning every expression this man owned, and that one was new. "You're very convincing for someone who's guilty," he said, though the edge in his voice had dulled slightly. "I'm convincing because I'm telling the truth," Sienna said. "You just never wanted to hear it." Massimo studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that used to make grown men confess to things they hadn't even done yet. Sienna held it without flinching, because she had nothing left to lose by holding it, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she registered that this was probably the most dangerous moment of her entire night. "If you didn't take it," Massimo said slowly, "then who did?" "I don't know," Sienna admitted, "but I know it wasn't me." The radio clipped to her belt crackled suddenly, Priya's voice cutting through the tension. "Sienna, copy. We've got movement near the service stairwell on level 2. Security's asking everyone to clear the east corridor immediately." Massimo's expression changed instantly, the brief crack in his certainty sealing back over into something colder and far more alert. "Stay here," he said. "Why?" "Because whoever's heading toward that stairwell," he said, already moving toward the door, "might be the reason you've been running for 8 months." Sienna didn't stay where she was told. She never had been good at that, even back when staying put might have saved her some trouble. She slipped out of the sweet seconds after Massimo did, following the sound of radio chatter down the east corridor toward the service stairwell. The hallway lights felt brighter than before, sharper, the kind of bright that made every shadow at the edges look deeper than it should. "Sienna, I told you to stay in the suite." Massimo's voice came from somewhere ahead of her, low and clipped. "And I told you I don't take orders well," she called back, rounding the corner just as he reached the stairwell door. The door to the service stairs was propped open with a fire extinguisher, which struck her immediately as wrong, because every stairwell door in this building had an alarm that should have gone off the second it opened without a badge swipe. Massimo noticed it too. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, and Sienna realized, with a small jolt, that he was reaching for a weapon she hadn't even known he was carrying. "Get behind me," he said. "Massimo." "Now." She did this time because something in his voice had shifted into a register she didn't recognize, one that left no room for arguing. They stepped through the propped door together, into a stairwell lit by flickering emergency bulbs, and that was when Sienna saw him. A man in a maintenance jumpsuit stood 3 steps below the landing, a radio in one hand and something small and metallic in the other. He looked up at the sound of the door, and for half a second, nobody moved at all. Then he lunged. Sienna barely had time to process what was happening before Massimo shoved her sideways into the wall, his arm coming up just as the man's hand swung toward her. Metal scraped against metal. Sienna heard herself gasp, felt her shoulder hit the cold concrete, and watched as Massimo twisted the man's wrist with a sharp, practiced motion that ended with the small device clattering down the stairs. It wasn't a knife, it was a syringe. "Who sent you?" Massimo's voice had dropped into something Sienna had never heard from him before, something that made the hallway feel 10 degrees colder. The man didn't answer. He twisted hard, trying to break free, and Massimo's grip tightened enough that the man's knees buckled. "I asked you a question." "I don't know anything," the man gasped. "I just got paid to clear the stairwell before kickoff. That's all I know, I swear." "Paid by who?" The man's eyes flicked toward Sienna, just briefly, just enough for her to catch it, and something about that look made her stomach drop. "Massimo," she said quietly. "He's not answering because he's scared of whoever hired him, not because he doesn't know." Massimo's jaw tightened. He shoved the man hard against the railing, pinning him there with one arm, his voice dangerously low. "You have 5 seconds to give me a name before I let go of this railing, and let you explain yourself to the people downstairs." "I don't have a name," the man said, panic cracking his voice wide open. "Just a number, a burner number, that's it, that's all I." He never finished the sentence. 2 men in dark suits appeared at the bottom of the stairwell, and the maintenance worker went rigid. his eyes widening with something that looked a lot like recognition and a lot more like fear. Before Massimo could react, the man wrenched himself sideways with a strength that came purely from terror, breaking free of Massimo's grip just long enough to vanish through a side door that led deeper into the stadium's lower levels. "Go after him," Massimo snapped at the two men below, who immediately took off in pursuit. Sienna stood frozen against the wall, her pulse hammering, the realization settling over her slowly and completely. Someone wanted her dead before she could explain anything. And whoever they were close enough and well-funded enough to plant a man inside Massimo Callaway's own security perimeter without anyone noticing, until it was almost too late. "That man knew something," Sienna said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to steady it. "Massimo, he looked at me like he recognized me." Massimo turned to face her fully for the first time since the attack, and the look in his eyes had changed completely from the one he'd worn in that sweet minutes earlier. "Then we're done wasting time," he said, "because whoever just tried to silence you permanently clearly believes you know something worth dying to protect. If this story has your pulse racing the way it has ours, do us a favor before the next chapter drops. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us who you think sent that man up the stairwell, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time to fix that, because Sienna and Massimo are about to find out just how deep this conspiracy really goes." Massimo led Sienna back through a private corridor she hadn't even known existed, one that bypassed the main concourse entirely and opened into a small operations room tucked behind the East Suites. Dario was already there when they arrived, hunched over a bank of monitors, his jaw set in a way that suggested the chase through the lower levels hadn't ended well. "He got out through the loading dock," Dario said, not looking up. "Cameras lost him near the delivery entrance. Whoever trained him knew our blind spots." "Then our blind spots aren't blind to everyone," Massimo said, pulling out a chair for Sienna without quite looking at her. "Pull the file, the one from 8 months ago." Dario's hands paused over the keyboard. "You sure about that?" "I'm not sure about anything tonight," Massimo said. "That's the problem." Sienna sat down slowly, still half convinced this entire night was some kind of fever dream brought on by stress and bad lighting. She watched as Dario typed in a series of commands, and a grainy security clip filled the center monitor, time-stamped from 8 months earlier. It was the gala. She recognized the ballroom instantly, the chandeliers, the long table where the silent auction items had been displayed. And there, in the corner of the frame, a woman in a navy dress walked briskly past a closed office door. "That's supposed to be me," Sienna said, leaning forward. "Walking out of your study with the file." "It is you," Dario said. "It's a woman wearing my dress from that night," Sienna corrected. "Not me." Massimo crossed his arms. "The face matches." "The face is angled away from the camera the entire time," Sienna said, pointing at the screen. "You can see her jaw, maybe the side of her cheek, but you cannot see her eyes once in this entire clip. I have watched myself on camera at 100 events. I know what I look like walking. That woman holds her shoulders wrong." Dario frowned, leaning closer to the screen himself. "She's right, the posture's off." "Run the timestamp again," Sienna said, surprising herself with how steady her voice had become. "What time does this say she left the study?" 10:42, Dario read. "I was on the terrace at 10:42, Sienna said. "I remember because the band changed songs right as the fireworks started, and I was talking to a vendor about table linens. There were at least a dozen witnesses." Massimo's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "That's a problem for whoever testified against you, not for me." "Nobody testified," Sienna said. "Nobody asked me anything. You looked at this footage, decided I was guilty, and spent 8 months hunting me instead of checking whether the timestamps even lined up." The room went quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft hum of the monitors. "Pull the access logs from the study door," Massimo said finally, his voice tighter than before. "Cross-reference them against the guest list." Dario typed quickly, and a second window opened, listing badge swipes in chronological order. Sienna scanned the list along with him, and her stomach tightened when she saw a name flash by that didn't belong to hotel staff or any guest she remembered from that night. "Who is that?" she asked, pointing at an entry timestamped 6 minutes before the woman in the navy dress appeared on camera. Dario clicked on the name, and a personnel file opened beside it. "Contractor," Dario said slowly. "Brought in by Julian Marsh's team to handle catering logistics. Badge was deactivated the next morning." Massimo's jaw tightened, the muscle working slowly along his cheek. Julian vouched for every person on his catering crew personally. He told me himself there was no way anyone outside the family could have gotten near that study. "Maybe he was wrong," Sienna said quietly. "Or maybe," Massimo said, his eyes fixed on the screen, "he wasn't." He stood there a moment longer, staring at a name that had apparently meant nothing to him 8 months ago and now meant everything. Sienna watched the calculations happen behind his eyes, watched 8 months of certainty quietly start to crack down the middle. "I want everything we have on that contractor," Massimo said finally, turning to Dario. "And I want it before Julian finds out we're looking." Sienna looked between the two men, the fear in her chest finally giving way to something else entirely, something close to hope. "Does this mean you believe me?" she asked. Massimo didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, before he finally spoke. "It means," he said, "we're not done digging yet." Dario stayed behind in the operations room to keep digging through the contractor's file, which left Massimo and Sienna alone in a narrow service corridor that ran beneath the stadium's east stands. The walls down here were unpainted concrete, lined with thick cables and the occasional flickering bulb, and the sound of the crowd above them came through as a low, constant rumble, like the building itself was breathing. "Where exactly are we going?" Sienna asked, keeping pace beside him. "The catering staging area," Massimo said. "If that contractor worked under Julian's crew 8 months ago, there's a chance someone here tonight worked alongside him. People in that line of work talk. And if nobody talks, then we find someone who's willing to start." Sienna glanced at him sideways. That sounded vaguely threatening. It was meant to sound efficient. "With you, I'm not always sure there's a difference." A faint, almost reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, gone before it could fully form. Sienna noticed it anyway, and filed it away somewhere she didn't have time to examine right now. They walked in silence for a stretch, their footsteps echoing off concrete, before Sienna finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the operations room. "Why didn't you ever just ask me?" she said. 8 months ago, before all of this, why was it so easy to believe I was guilty?" Massimo didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had lost some of its usual edge. "Because the footage was clean," he said. "Because you left that night without saying goodbye. And because believing you'd betrayed me was easier than believing someone closer to me had." "That's not an answer," Sienna said. "That's an excuse." "It's the truth." The truth would have been asking me directly, instead of sending men to hunt me down for 8 months. Massimo stopped walking. "You think I wanted it to be you?" "I think it was convenient," Sienna said, stopping as well. "I was new enough to the family's circle that nobody would defend me too hard. I didn't have the kind of protection Julian has, or Dario, or anyone who's actually been around you long enough to matter. I was an easy answer." The words landed harder than she expected them to. And for a moment, Massimo looked like a man who had been handed a mirror he didn't particularly want. "You're not wrong," he admitted quietly. That admission surprised her more than anything else he'd said all night. They reached a heavy steel door marked Staging Area C, and Massimo paused before opening it, glancing back at her. "Whoever's in there might recognize you," he said. "Stay close, let me ask the questions first." "I'm capable of asking my own questions, Massimo." "I know you are," he said. "That's not the problem." "Then what is?" "The problem," he said, pushing the door open, "is that the last time someone in this building recognized you, they tried to put a needle in your neck." That shut her up, at least for the moment. Inside, the staging area buzzed with quiet, controlled chaos, caterers moving trays and checking lists under bright fluorescent lights. Massimo approached a woman organizing a row of carts, flashing credentials that made her stiffen instantly. "I need information on a contractor who worked your crew 8 months ago," he said. "Catering logistics, badge deactivated the morning after a gala downtown." The woman's eyes flicked toward Sienna, then back to Massimo, hesitation written plainly across her face. "I don't talk about old contracts," she said carefully. "Company policy." "This isn't company business," Massimo said. "This is mine." Something about the way he said it made the woman's shoulders drop slightly, the fight draining out of her posture. "He went by Marcus," she said quietly. "Quiet guy, good with logistics, never talked about himself. Disappeared right after that gala without collecting his last paycheck." "Did he ever mention who referred him for the job?" Sienna asked, stepping forward despite Massimo's earlier instructions. The woman hesitated again, glancing nervously toward the door, before finally answering. "He said a man named Julian got him the position personally," she said. "Said it was the best favor anyone had ever done for him." Sienna felt the floor shift slightly beneath her again, the same way it had the moment she first heard Massimo's voice through that sweet door. Massimo's expression hardened into something colder than she'd seen all night. "Then it's time," he said quietly. "That Julian and I had a long overdue conversation." They were halfway back through the service corridor when Sienna's radio crackled with a voice that made her stomach drop before a single word registered. "Sienna, it's Theo. You good? I heard there was some kind of incident near the stairwell." She grabbed the radio off her belt, relief and dread tangling together in her chest. "I'm fine. Where are you?" "Security post, level 2, same as always," Theo said. "Why do I feel like you're not telling me everything?" "Because I'm not," Sienna said. "Meet me at the staff corridor near gate 12. 5 minutes." Massimo glanced at her as she clipped the radio back into place. "Your brother." "My brother," Sienna confirmed. "He's worked stadium security for 3 years. If anyone here would have noticed something off about tonight's setup, it's him." "Or," Massimo said carefully, "he's the reason whoever's hunting you knew exactly where to find you." Sienna stopped walking. "Don't." "I'm not accusing him of anything," Massimo said. "I'm telling you how this works. Whoever framed you needed a way to track your movements after you disappeared. A badge with stadium-wide clearance, belonging to someone who trusts you completely, would be the easiest way to do that without ever needing your brother's cooperation. You think someone used Theo without him knowing? I think it's worth finding out." They reached gate 12 just as Theo came around the corner, still in uniform, his expression shifting from relief to confusion the moment he spotted Massimo standing beside his sister. "Sienna, who is this?" "It's a long story," Sienna said. "Theo, I need you to think back, 6 weeks ago, when my transfer to this stadium's hospitality group went through. Did anyone ask you for anything around that time? Access codes, schedule information, anything like that?" Theo's jaw tightened slightly. "Why does that matter right now?" "Because someone knew exactly when and where I'd be working tonight," Sienna said. "And I need to know how." Theo was quiet for a long moment, his eyes flicking between his sister and the man standing far too close to her for comfort. "There was a guy," he said finally. "Said he worked logistics for one of the financial firms that books suites here regularly. Told me he needed to verify staff schedules for a security audit, said it was routine. I gave him read access to the staffing calendar. That's it. Nothing sensitive. Read access to the staffing calendar would show exactly which shifts I was assigned," Sienna said quietly, "including the transfer paperwork with my new last name on it." Theo's face drained of color. "Sienna, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said, reaching out to squeeze his arm. "This isn't your fault." "Did you get a name?" Massimo asked. Theo hesitated, clearly uncomfortable answering a stranger's questions, but something in Massimo's tone left little room for refusal. "Marsh," Theo said. "Julian Marsh." The corridor went silent, except for the distant roar of the crowd above them. Sienna turned to look at Massimo, watching the last fragments of his certainty about this entire situation finally collapse completely. "Your consigliere's name," she said slowly, "keeps showing up everywhere this conspiracy touches." "I'm aware," Massimo said, his voice tight. "He vouched for the contractor at the gala," Sienna continued. "He's the one who got information out of my brother without either of us knowing. Massimo, how close is this man to you?" "Close enough that I trusted him with things I've never told anyone else," Massimo said quietly. "Close enough that I never once considered looking in his direction." Theo looked between them, piecing together fragments of a conversation he clearly hadn't been briefed on. "Somebody want to explain what's actually happening tonight?" "Your sister was framed for something she didn't do," Massimo said. "And the man responsible has spent 8 months making sure I hunted the wrong person." Theo's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Then let's go find him." "Not yet," Massimo said. "If Julian realizes we know, he disappears before we can prove anything, and your sister stays a wanted woman for the rest of her life." Sienna felt the weight of that settle over her, heavy and clarifying all at once. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Massimo's eyes hardened into something sharp and deliberate. "We let him think he's still winning," he said, "right up until the moment he isn't." They moved Theo off the floor and into the operations room, where Dario was waiting with a printout that confirmed everything Sienna had been afraid to say out loud. "Julian's signature is on the contractor's original hearing paperwork," Dario said, sliding the page across the desk. "Same paperwork that got Marcus badge access to the gala's private wing 8 months ago. And the firm Theo mentioned, the one that supposedly needed the staffing calendar for an audit, traces back to a shell company registered under Julian's wife's maiden name." Massimo stared at the page without touching it, his expression unreadable in a way that worried Sienna more than open anger would have. "He's been ahead of us this entire time," Massimo said quietly. "Every piece of evidence I ever had against Sienna came through him first." "Because he built it," Sienna said, "piece by piece for 8 months, while you spent every one of those months hunting me instead of him." "I'm aware," Massimo said, his voice tight enough to cut. Theo paced near the door, restless in a way that came from feeling responsible for something he never saw coming. "So what now? We go find him, right? Get this over with." "Not yet," Massimo said. "Julian has spent 8 months making sure he's 3 steps ahead. If we move on him without proof he can't talk his way out of, he disappears before tonight ends, and Sienna spends the rest of her life as a wanted woman." "Then we get proof," Theo said. "I'll go back to my post, pull the original badge logs myself, the ones that haven't been cleaned up for the audit story he fed me." "Theo, no," Sienna said immediately. "If Julian finds out you're digging." "He doesn't know I know anything," Theo said. "To him, I'm just a security guard who handed over calendar access 6 weeks ago and never thought about it again. I'll be careful." Sienna didn't like it, but she also recognized the look on her brother's face. The same stubborn determination she'd inherited from him long before either of them had any idea how dangerous their family's choices could become. "5 minutes," she said, "then you radio me back." Theo nodded and disappeared through the door, and Sienna spent the next several minutes pretending she wasn't watching the clock on the wall far too closely. 4 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. "Something's wrong," Sienna said, grabbing her radio. "Theo, come in." Static answered her. "Theo." More static, followed by a click that made her stomach turn to ice. "He's not picking up," she said, looking at Massimo. "He said 5 minutes, it's been 10. Massimo was already moving toward the door, Dario falling into step behind him without needing to be told. "Pull every camera feed near the level 2 security post," Massimo said. "Now." Dario worked fast, monitors flickering through angle after angle until one feed froze on an image that made Sienna's knees go weak. Theo, on the ground near the security post, 2 men dragging him by the arms toward a service exit, while a third man watched from a distance, his face turned just enough away from the camera to stay unidentifiable. Except for one detail. The watch on his wrist. Sienna had seen that exact watch once before, months ago, during a dinner she barely remembered, sitting 2 seats down from a man with an easy smile and an even easier voice. "That's Julian," she said quietly. "I'd recognize that watch anywhere." Massimo's jaw tightened into something hard and final. "He took your brother." "Why would he do that?" Sienna's voice cracked despite her best effort to hold it steady. "Theo doesn't know anything that could hurt him." "He doesn't need Theo to know anything," Massimo said. "He needs Theo as leverage because he's figured out we're closing in, and he needs something to keep you both controllable until he decides what to do next." A new message blinked onto one of Dario's monitors, routed through an anonymous channel that took less than 10 seconds to trace back to a burner number identical to the one mentioned in the stairwell hours earlier. The message was short. "Bring me the woman, and her brother walks away untouched. Bring me anyone else, and he doesn't." Sienna read it twice, her hands shaking, before looking up at Massimo with a question that terrified her even as she asked it. "What do we do?" Massimo's expression hardened into something Sienna had never seen from him before, something far more dangerous than the cold control he usually wore like armor. "We give him exactly what he asked for," Massimo said, "just not the way he's expecting." The plan was simple enough to explain and dangerous enough to make Sienna's pulse hammer the entire time Massimo laid it out. She would walk toward the loading dock alone, exactly as Julian's message demanded, while Massimo and Dario moved through the service tunnels on a parallel route, staying close enough to intervene the moment Theo was actually in sight. "You're using me as bait," Sienna said. "I'm using you as the thing he wants," Massimo said. "There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one right now." "It feels exactly like one." "Then trust that I don't intend to let anything happen to you," he said, and something in the way he said it left no room for her usual sharp comeback. She walked. The loading dock sat below the stadium's lower bowl, a wide concrete space lined with delivery trucks and stacked crates, lit by a handful of work lights that left more shadow than brightness. Sienna's footsteps echoed louder than she wanted them to as she stepped into the open, scanning the space for any sign of her brother. "That's far enough." Julian stepped out from behind a parked truck, his easy smile fully in place despite the circumstances, as though this were just another negotiation over catering contracts. "Where's Theo?" Sienna demanded. "Safe," Julian said. "For now, where's Massimo?" "Not here," Sienna lied. "He doesn't know about this message. I came alone." Julian's smile widened slightly, unconvinced. "Sienna, I framed you for theft and spent 8 months managing Massimo's rage from a comfortable distance. Forgive me if I don't take your word at face value." Above them, the stadium roared, a sound so loud it rattled faintly through the concrete, the crowd reacting to something happening on the field that none of them down here would ever see. "Why me?" Sienna asked, stalling, buying time the way Massimo had told her to. "Why frame an event coordinator nobody important would notice?" "Because you were perfect," Julian said. "New enough to the family's circle that nobody questioned your guilt too hard. Close enough to Massimo that your disappearance would consume him completely, instead of looking at the people standing right beside him." "You used him," Sienna said. "Your own boss." "I used his blind spots," Julian corrected. 8 months of those blind spots have kept the real file exactly where I need it, and kept 3 crime families looking everywhere except at the one man holding all the leverage. A side door banged open behind Julian, and Theo stumbled through it, hands bound, shoved forward by one of the 2 men who had taken him earlier. Sienna started forward instinctively, and Julian raised a hand, stopping her cold. "Not yet," he said. "First, you tell me where Massimo actually is." "I told you, he's not." "Right here," Massimo said, stepping out from the shadows near the loading bay door, Dario emerging from the opposite side a heartbeat later. Julian's smile finally cracked. "Massimo, I should have known she'd be a terrible liar under pressure." You should have known better than to touch her brother, Massimo said, his voice carrying a flat, cold finality that made even Theo flinch. Let's discuss this reasonably, Julian said, backing slightly toward the truck behind him. I have the file, Massimo, the real one. The one that's been keeping 3 families exactly as nervous as you wanted them to be. Walk away with that file tonight, and none of this needs to go further. And Sienna, Massimo asked. Sienna becomes a problem you solve quietly, the way you were always planning to, Julian said. Nothing has to change about that part. Massimo's eyes flicked toward Sienna, just for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction she saw the decision happen. No, he said. Julian blinked. No. I'm not interested in the file, Massimo said. Not tonight. You'd choose her over 8 months of work. Julian's voice rose, disbelief bleeding into something close to panic. Over the one thing that protects your entire empire. I'd choose her over a file I should have never trusted you to manage in the first place, Massimo said, taking a step forward. Let her brother go, Julian. This ends now, one way or another. Julian's hand moved toward his jacket, fast and unmistakable, and Theo's captor shoved him sideways toward the open service tunnel behind them, scattering everyone's positions in a single chaotic second. A gunshot cracked through the loading dock, swallowed almost entirely by the roar of the crowd above. And Sienna watched, frozen, as Massimo staggered backward into the dark. Sienna's scream tore through the loading dock before she even realized she'd made a sound. Massimo hit the ground hard, one hand pressed against his shoulder, and for one terrible second, she thought the worst had already happened. Then he moved, cursing under his breath, and she realized the shot had caught the edge of his shoulder, not anything that would stop him. Dario was already moving, tackling the man who'd fired before he could line up a second shot, while Theo wrenched free of his bindings and scrambled toward his sister. Julian, seeing his window closing fast, bolted for the open tunnel behind him, and Massimo, bleeding and furious, forced himself upright. Let him go, Sienna said, grabbing his good arm before he could chase after Julian. Massimo, you're hurt. He's not getting out of this building, Massimo said. He's not going to get far either, Dario called out, already speaking into his radio, directing 2 more men toward the tunnel exits. Every door down here has been locked since the moment we confirmed Theo was taken. He's got nowhere to go but in circles. True to Dario's word, it took less than 4 minutes for Julian's voice to come crackling back over the radio from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, no longer smooth or confident, just tired and cornered. There's nowhere left, one of Massimo's men reported. We've got him. Massimo closed his eyes briefly, the tension finally easing out of his shoulders, before he looked at Sienna again. It's over, he said. Is it, she asked quietly, really over? He's been recording every conversation he thought gave him leverage over me, Massimo said. Dario's pulling his phone now. Between that and the contractor's paper trail, there won't be a version of tonight where your name stays attached to any of this. Theo, still catching his breath beside them, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. So that's it. We just go back to a normal Tuesday after this. There's no such thing as a normal Tuesday in this family, Massimo said. But yes, Sienna's name clears tonight. Above them, the stadium erupted into one final, deafening roar, the kind that only comes at the very end of a match decided in the last possible second. None of them had seen a single play of the game they were technically standing inside of. Later, once Dario had cleared the wound on Massimo's shoulder and confirmed Julian was secured for the night, Sienna found Massimo standing alone near the now-empty East Suite where this entire night had started, staring out at the field through the glass. You really gave up the file, she said, stepping up beside him. For me. I did. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that used to make her nervous, before answering. Because I spent 8 months telling myself I bought every seat in this building to corner a thief, he said. And somewhere in this past week, I figured out that wasn't true at all. Then what was it for? One conversation, Massimo said. The one I never let myself have 8 months ago, when it would have actually mattered. I told myself there wasn't time, that the file was more important, that finding you mattered only because of what you supposedly took from me. I think I knew, even then, that none of that was the real reason. Sienna felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been wound tight for 8 long months. You bought an entire stadium, she said slowly, for one conversation. It seemed reasonable at the time, he said, the ghost of a smile finally breaking through. It seemed insane at the time. That too. Outside the headlines, in the days that followed, the story stayed exactly as ridiculous as it had sounded that morning. Eccentric businessman buys out an entire stadium's luxury, seating for reasons nobody outside a very small circle would ever fully understand. The press moved on within a week, chasing the next strange headline, the next billionaire's excess. Only Sienna knew the truth of it. That underneath all the noise and the danger and 8 long months of running, this had never really been about a file, or a family's empire, or even the truth finally coming out. It had been about one man, refusing to let one woman slip past him again, in the one place on Earth large enough to guarantee she finally couldn't. If this story had you holding your breath all the way to that loading dock, let us know in the comments which part hit you the hardest. Hit that like button if Massimo and Sienna earned it. Share this with someone who loves a slow-burn mafia romance with real stakes. And subscribe if you want to be first in line for the next story we drop. We've got more waiting for you, and trust us, they're worth sticking around for. See you in the next video.